thankfully. So it's so good to see everybody today. Bonjour, Ellen. Bonjour, Karen. I always see Karen. I always see you're I only see like a couple boxes and I always see Karen. Always good to see your smiling face. Thanks everybody for being here. If this is your first time here, you will want to find Kate French's feed. Right now she's showing the barren trees of the Place des Vosges. And just if you're on an iPhone or an iPad, you could just double click the image to lock it into your screen to pin it there. And if not, then you could also, if you're on a computer or a different device, you could go in the right-hand corner and hit the blue bubble, and that will just hit pin. So it'll keep your image on the screen, and then you could still hear me yakking away. If you get back to my square, you won't get to see wonderful Paris. So I'm going to turn my video off so that you know you're in the wrong place, so we could see everything here. And yesterday was gorgeous and blue sky in Paris, and today, of course, we have a little bit of rain. So, but that's all right. It's not raining at the moment. So Place des Vosges, we'll get everybody in here. Place des Vosges is a wonderful square that's in the middle of Paris, and I'm sure a lot of people know this spot. It is a much loved spot. It's also one of the few places that you could go and sit on the grass, which is another plus, especially on a beautiful sunny day. But there is so many different stories that came out of this. I spent a ton of time looking up each and every number on here. And with that, I think I found about 10 more people to do podcast episodes about. And then I would start doing research and then go down a rabbit hole and then have to get my focus back to the task at hand. But I found there's so many great stories. We probably won't even get to all of them today because I probably have 3 hours worth of stories, but we'll cover a bunch of them. And so I'm really excited to share this one because I know a lot of people love coming to Place des Vosges in the Marais. So we'll get it started. Kate is just cruising around here in the middle. This is in the middle. It's the square Louis the 13th. And here's a statue of him in the center of it. And we'll kind of go back to some of we'll get a few more people in here. Some of the history that is actually here. But there's 4 fountains in this area, and there is this great statue of Louis the 13th here as well, which is fantastic. And this was actually originally done by Jean-Pierre Cortot, who also did all of the fountains. But then, of course, that revolution happened and everything in here was destroyed. And of course, they destroyed the bronze statue that was here and melted it down. And then later it was replaced with this lovely marble one. But what's really funny about this one is how he is. The first time I saw it, I was like, this is what is that underneath the horse's belly? And so it was redone in 1829. It was inaugurated on November 4th, 1829, and it was done by Charles Dupaty, and he did it after it's a copy of the original. But at one point under Napoleon III in 1852, the belly of the horse started to fall and break a little, so they stuck this little crutch underneath him, and they did it so it looks like a tree stump, which is just hilarious because you're like, well, how is that horse, like, was this horse just walking and decided to straddle on top of this tree branch? So tree stump. But it is pretty cool to see. I think it's the only one of Louis the 13th that's actually in the city. And the reason it's Louis the 13th was because the Place Royale, which is what this was originally called, was basically dedicated for the announcement of the engagement of his wedding to Anne of Austria. But the Place des Vosges itself, of course, has a much longer history and about 3 different names that it's been. Originally, this was the former Hotel des Tournelles. It was built in 1388. When it was a Hotel des Tournelles, not many of the royals lived here, but a few died here. Louis XII died here in 1515. And then Francois Premier became president. He was the son-in-law of Louis XII. And then under that, Henry II died here. So that's kind of the most famous story of this. Henry II was, of course, married to Catherine de Medici. He died because they were holding a jousting tournament here. And it was a celebration for the joint marriage of his daughter, Elizabeth de France, to Philippe II, and Marguerite de France to the Duke de Savoy. And they had a jousting tournament here, and Henry took part in the jousting tournament and ended up going against this guy named Gabriel de Lorge Montgomery. He was the king had told him, excuse me, the king had said, no, I want, let's keep going. Let's keep having, keep continuing the match. Well, Gabriel didn't really want to do that, but then he did it anyway, because the king is telling him to do it. And his horse kind of reared up and his lance broke, and he started going towards Henry II. The broken lance went into his eye, and Henry II died about 12 days later on July 10th, 1559. Surgeons, they tried to do everything, but it was basically, he had sepsis and infections because of this piece of wood that got in his eye. So after that, Catherine de Medici was like, I don't want to be here. It's too bad of a memory, because the jousting tournament happened just out on Rue Saint-Antoine, which is just right outside the way. And he was taken here to the Hotel des Tournelles, and that's where he died. So she wanted to be out of there. So she said, I'm up and we're leaving. And so, but Montgomery, he ended up, Henry on his deathbed, said, I'm sorry, this is not your fault. I relinquish you from any, fault of this. But Catherine, as we know, if you've listened to our podcast about Catherine, she was not the greatest of ladies, and she loved to dabble in a little bit of poison and witchcraft. And she was in charge of basically calling the shots on the St. Bartholomew Day massacre and a bunch of other things, including most likely killing Jeanne d'Ambert, who was the mother of Henry IV. So she decided to seek her revenge on him, and it was slow, but she finally got her way, because he was later captured and put into prison, and then he was killed and tortured on the Place de Grave, which is the Place de Hotel de Ville now, which is where they like to kill those people that decide to kill a king, because that's also where Ravaillac was killed after he killed Henry IV. So lovely Sunday morning conversation for you. But this, the whole place here, it was, later on in the beginning of the 1600s, Henry IV decided he wanted to create and build silver and silk factories to rival what they had in Lyon and Milan. And so he had this whole idea that he was going to do that. We are facing, I think, the northeast right now, but or southeast. So basically behind where Kate was where they had a silk factory. And so he decided they tore down the Tournelle, and he was going to give some of this land and say, okay, you guys could build here, create places for the factory workers, but then they put very strict guidelines on how they wanted it to look. And so none of those people could adhere to the guidelines. So then all of the rich family members of royalty and all of his people decided to jump in instead, and started to have these lovely pavilions built. And so there's 36.
Speaker's not working for some reason, so we can't hear her.
We'll have to. If you just joined us, you have to just make sure you find Kate and Kate French, and then you right click on that and pin it to your screen, and then you should still be able to hear me. And so Henry IV decided to have these things built. What we're heading towards right now is the Pavilion Henri IV. And so this one is the tallest of all of them. And so if you look around it, they look like they almost identical, but obviously are some changes. If you look closely to the windows to the right of there, that's a fake facade because they're doing some work. And of course they love to throw up all these different ads, but they almost are always there. They look almost exactly the same, but you have to really look at some of the upper windows. But this one here, the King's Pavilion, is higher, of course, because it's Henry IV. And there is a bust of him. There is on the other side. That's kind of the main entrance that a lot of people use when they come in here. And it's pretty, I mean, could you imagine just living in any of these places? It's all like, this is kind of like one of those most sought after real estates in the whole city. But it was first called, the Place Royale, and it's the first square in Paris, the first royal square in Paris before Place Dauphine. And it was all planned out so they could move into these places, they could buy these places, but they had to keep the outside the same. A lot of people would ask to get add balconies and things like that in. So a lot of them were able to do that. So you will see how some of those things are a little different. And it is interesting. This side of it is actually much narrower. If you look on like Google Earth, some of the others, some of them you could really see how some of them actually stretch out a little farther. But some of these little balconies were added on here. And this is always kind of I think this is the first time I came here. You had to come down through this little entrance, which was great. It's a pretty amazing place to see, especially the first time when you come here. It's like, oh, so lovely. But it changed names quite a few times. Originally it was Place Royale. And then in 1800, under Lucien Bonaparte, who was the Minister of the Interior under Napoleon Bonaparte, he decided that they should call it Place des Vosges. And the reason it's called Place des Vosges, which isn't exactly the sexiest, most romantic reason, because a lot of these, like, I love to go and see, why is it Place Dauphine and who's it named after? And why is it, all these different names? And it's basically got Place des Vosges because that was the first department that paid taxes to the new French Republic. So thanks to that, they decided to give it the Place des Vosges, which it's like, okay, that's not exactly the most exciting reason. But it went back and forth. It was Place Royale, Place Republique, Place, and then it was, there was another one, Place des Fédérés. So it just kept moving around. And then over time, it's been during the revolution, as we said, that statue was, of course, destroyed because that's what they want to destroy, anything that had to do with royalty. And a lot of the trees were destroyed as well. Louis XIV and it added a bunch of the trees, but then most of the chestnut trees we see today were added under Napoleon. So in the early 1800s. But as far as it's being called Place Royale, it's Place Royale, but none of the royalty ever lived here because the King's Pavilion here, and this was the first side done. So the side that we're on right now was the first side done. It wasn't finished. It was finished after Henry IV died. So he died in 1610, and this wasn't completed until 1612. But it is a very expensive address to have. But the Pavillon du Roi, as we saw, where Henry was thinking he would live, ended up being taken over in 1605 when they were building it. And as they were building it, the master mason and the carpenter actually lived in there for a while. And they have all these fantastic doors. And you wonder who gets to live in these places now. But it's a great little place to walk. I thought it looked like it was going to be really rainy. So I thought this was a good way for us to keep Cape dry. And I couldn't believe we hadn't really come here before. We brushed through it once, I think, when we went to the Hotel de Sully, which we could peek into here at the end of this little corridor. But this side of the building is all odd numbers, and the other side is all even numbers. So that's a way you could kind of decipher it. And then it's the hotel. The number one was the Pavilion de Roi. The 1B was built, taken over by Philippe de Coligny and his wife Marie de Bez. They were the grandparents of the Marquise de Sévigné, who was born yesterday on February 5th, 1626, basically right above Kate's head. And she was amazing woman. We did a podcast episode about her, and I will put all of these links of all these things and notes on my website at ClaudineHemingway.com. But she was this amazing woman of letters, but she was basically kind of like she was actually, we should think of her as a journalist, because she would basically write these letters to her daughter when her daughter left Paris. And it would basically have, Kate, you could pop in we could pop in there for a second. This is a Hotel de Sully, which is gorgeous little area to walk through. But she basically would just describe all of these stories of things going on in Paris. She described the trial of Fouquet, that the Louis XIV threw in prison and then took all of his artists to go create Versailles. But her letters are just amazing. And her daughter would get these letters and she would actually read them to people. And so eventually her mom just learned that this is what she was doing. And so then she was writing even more elaborate and longer letters. They ended up being published over, oh, look at that. Signs of spring, everyone, spring. So these letters were amazing. And if you go to the Musée de Carnavalet, there's a lot of it dedicated in there to her because she once lived there. But you'll have to listen to the episode. She's really fantastic and a fascinating woman. But this is Hotel de Sully. This is a beautiful place to come. And if you are interested in books about French history, and especially the monuments, just to the right of that open door, there is the library of the Centre de Monument. And that is where you could get basically a book about anything you want in Paris and France, all in French, by the way. So I get in big trouble when I go there. So I try to only go there once. But I love this. This is a piece from the old building that was here. And so I love that thing. I always love any of those little relics. Thank you, Kate. Isn't it beautiful? You can't really go, that's the offices in there. So it's not a place that you could go into and check out. I don't know if actually, I don't think this is open on that weekend in September, but it is a lovely little pass through to get here. To get through, this isn't always open. There has been times that this has not been open. The first couple times I went here, you
Your
couldn't
speaker is not working. Please check your connection.
And so you could, it's a nice little way to pass through here real quickly. But every one of these, like of all the different buildings here, there was different writers lived here. Colette lived in these buildings at one point. Another infamous Dominique Strauss-Kahn, who was very infamous, who's current. He's still alive today. If you've not seen the documentary about him, I think it was on Netflix. It's very interesting. But as he's known, DSK, he lived here. And then a whole lot of the mistresses of the different people in the court and the government, they kept their mistresses here. And it's like, hey, it's a pretty good place to be put up. But look, I love like the top of these little arcades. They're so beautiful. But there's the one number 5, which was back on the corner, Louis de Rochechouart. He had it taken down and then he had it rebuilt. And then he had the artist Jules Cousin ended up painting a lot of the ceilings in it. And he had this vast, huge collection of books. And his books were actually given to the Carnavalet. And he was the very first curator. We're very close to the Musée Carnavalet. which if you have not gone to Paris since it has been reopened, definitely make a plan to go there and I would definitely recommend booking your ticket in advance. They are free. And I would recommend booking 2 separate days because they, from time to time, every few weeks, go on strike. So you don't want to get to Paris and have your one day that you were planning to go to the Carnival and have them on strike. It would be rather depressing. So make sure you book 2 different days. They are free. So you can, if you go later in the day, a lot of times you could just get right in. But if you want to go first thing in the morning and give yourself, if you're super into French history, give yourself some time in there because it's huge and amazing inside. It took me 3 days to get through it all, but I am not the average museum goer as far as I have to do every single thing. Are these people in front of our pillar? Okay, we'll stand around here and then we'll come back for this in a second. But at number 7, that was also just down there. This was another person that I just was, that I am super excited to find out even more about. But at number 7, which was, or number 9, sorry, which is just right down here. This is Henry IV gave this to Pierre Fouché-Pusquer. He was a king's advisor, and he decided he was given number 9 through 13. So basically half of this whole entire side that we're on. In 1655, Charles d'Albert had it, but in 1850, a woman named Rachel, and that's what she just went by, Rachel. This is way before there was people like Madonna. And she was known as Rachel, and she was a huge popular actress at the time. And she ended up dying down south, and then they ended up bringing her back up here to Paris, and they put her body here at number 9. And so everybody came to visit her, everyone from Alexander Dumas, everyone. But she was also a famous mistress of, and this is kind of, this is kind of gross, Napoleon III, also his son, Prince Napoleon, and then also the Count Walewski, who was the illegitimate son of Napoleon Bonaparte. So it's kind of like the father and the son. That's kind of gross. But she lived here, and she was a fascinating character. So already I've added her to my list of podcast people to explore even more of. But she died when she was only 36. Again, so many people die in French history at 36 or 37. It's always those 2 numbers. We had yesterday, or last week, we had Jericho was 36. But we're coming up here to number 11, and this is the Hotel Villesert, and it was sold to Francois de Lemonnier. He was the Secretary of Finance to Henry IV. So most of these people at first were all under, of course, Henry IV. The courtesan, Marie de Lorme, lived here. She inspired a play that Victor Hugo did, who also plays very prominent in today's, as you will know. But right behind Kate, and are these people still here? I think they're still here. But did they leave? Oh, good. So right here, number 11. This is kind of one of my very favorite little Paris secrets. So right here on this pillar, it's a 1764 Nicolas. And this is what they say is the oldest graffiti in all of Paris. There's some like in buildings, like I've seen things like when I was lucky enough to go up the facade of Saint-Sulpice, there's stuff in there and you see dates older. But this is really cool. What's also really cool is this thing survived the revolution as they just were destroying a lot of other things around here. But this was a gentleman named Nicolas Restif de Le Breton. He was a printmaker and a typographer. He left these markings all over the city. He would walk around at night doing these late night strolls, and he was called the Graffin, which means the scribbler. And he basically would leave these things all over the city. This is the only known one left. So it is 258 years old, and it's the oldest graffiti in Paris. I just think it's so cool. And it's one of those things like you would never know to go look at that. You never know to keep looking up and down all of these individual pillars. But I think I think that's pretty cool. And then it's just kind of like my favorite, Jean-Charles de Castelbajac. with his angels. He just does it with chalk. But I love that one. That's one of my favorite stories. And so on here, there's also quite a few galleries here. There's quite a few restaurants. There's a back on that back corner, there's L'Amboise, which was it's a very expensive, fancy restaurant that I believe the Obamas ate at on one of their trips to Paris. It's very expensive. I have not gone to that one yet, but I'll have to put that on the list of someday. But as we keep going down here, there was Louis Rohan also lived here. At number 15, the painter, and you have all these gorgeous doors. The painter Auguste Laurent Boulard lived at number 15. And these all go all the way up. So some of them, especially the ones on the side, these buildings, they have big courtyards that go all the way through. The ones that we saw at first were the King's Pavilion. Some of those are more narrow, but a lot of these have courtyards and they go all the way back in. And so they are pretty fantastic. I did see something, I'll have to see if I could find it. It was on YouTube and it was a BBC show, and it was somebody that came to Paris and she was doing like a little tour. It was on a BBC television show, and she went up into one of these apartments, and the view from up there was pretty fantastic. But there's little tea places, there's clothing stores, lots of art. There's quite a few art galleries. So this is a great place. If it is a rainy day, this is a great place to come, and you can spend like your whole morning here, because there's also, and we'll see it towards the very end, the Museum of Victor Hugo. And this is number 17. This is number 17 is one of the few that still has all of its original 17th century beams and decorations on the inside. Some of these ones were painted by Charles Lebrun, added, decorations to the ceilings, and Eustace Lesueur and Louis Laveau. And some of those have all been destroyed, sadly, but one of them is actually in the Carnavalet that we'll see coming up, or we'll see the outside. And up here on the corner, there's a restaurant called Ma Bourgogne. There it is. And there's been a restaurant here since the mid 19th century, but this one's actually really good. It's when you come here, especially if it's a sunny day, you always want the place that is sitting out there. So I've sat right there on the edge under the outer pillar having lunch in the sunshine, and it's just pretty amazing. But you could go down here. We don't have to go down there, Kate, but if you go down that direction, you go to the Musée Carnavalet. And there used to be ones right here. So this used to be an actual, the building used to continue here, but then they ended up cutting through and adding some streets here, of course, so people could get through. But this restaurant's pretty good. I'll put links on that. I think this is actually on my website. I have a bunch of my favorite restaurants, and this one I do believe I already have on there. So now we're heading to the North Pavilion, and this is the Queen's Pavilion. There's always that art gallery always have these like really modern, what's the Birth of Venus, Botticelli over there. They always have some really kind of cool contemporary art in there. Number 21 right here, it's called the Hotel Cardinal Richelieu, another one of my favorite people in French history, but he never lived here. His brother-in-law did, the Duc de Richelieu. His great grandnephew also bought it, but he ended up marrying the neighbor, the daughter of the Prince de Guise, and they lived here for a short period of time. But aren't these doors just fantastic? There's a hotel here as well. So if you really want to get fancy, you could stay in the hotel down in the center. Lots of art galleries. And then we have a little row of restaurants coming up here. We have Carrette and a bunch of other ones that are really great. Carrette is there's one over in the Trocadero. It's a great place to go for salads and desserts. There was at number 23, they ended up 23 and 25 were owned by the same people. They had the whole huge pavilion. And Pierre Gobelin de Quessy had two sons. Thomas was one of them. And Thomas, on March 4th, 1680, decided to set fire to it to prove his love for Madame du Montespan. And Madame du Montespan, this was before she got, tied up with Louis XIV. We also did a podcast episode about her. She puts the evil ways of Catherine de Medici to shame, because she is the one that ended up she was kind of ousted out of the king's life in Versailles because she got trapped in the affair of the poisons. And they found out that she had used this witch doctor to create a poison, a love potion, and she had been giving it to Louis XIV for years. To create this potion, it was very horrific. It involved babies. We'll just leave it at that, and not living babies. It was pretty horrific. And it was, when we did that podcast episode, I was like, okay, how do I talk about this without it sounding as horrific as it is? But she ended up, they found out because people were getting sick because she was poisoning other people. So she was ousted, but she had quite a few illegitimate children of Louis XIV. And then Madame de Maintenon ended up coming into the picture. And that's who he had his secret marriage to. All these great stories in French history. There's Carrette. And then we're coming up in the middle is the Queen's Pavilion. Of course, again, none of the kings or queens ever lived here. But this was done by Nicolas Jean de Castille. He was the treasurer, but he had worked with Nicolas Fouquet. And Nicolas Fouquet, as we just mentioned a little bit ago, he was the one that had Vosges built. He was the finance minister for, I think it should be here. Is it open, Kate? Can we poke in there? Oh no, is that you could go back. I think there was like a, that open pavilion that we were coming up to. One of these we should be able to walk in and maybe see. Or is that just the street? One of these, I think it's maybe the next one over. But Nicolas Fouquet was the one that he had this lavish party at Vaux-le-Vicomte and invited Louis XIV and his massive entourage. And he came, and Louis XIV was like, hey, how are you affording this? And basically everybody convinced him that he should arrest him. Oh, here it is, the Pavilion de la Reine. Arrest him. And then that's when he took all of his artists. He took Louis Laveau, Charles Lebrun, and Alexandre Lenoir, and decided he was so jealous of Vaux-le-Vicomte. That is when he created Versailles, changing it from the tiny hunting lodge that it was. But this is a hotel. It starts out, it starts at about 324 euros a night. But if you wanted to stay there next Wednesday for some random day, it was like 724 euros. It was cheaper on Valentine's Day. So I'm not sure what Wednesday or Thursday is. It made it so expensive. But he ended up, Castille was also thrown into prison. And in 1680, a fire destroyed much of the building. So then it had to be rebuilt. And then, of course, these all had to be rebuilt so they all look the same, because you have to keep that same look of the facade. But it is really gorgeous. It's just a really great place to come and just stroll around when you come over here to the Marais. Lots of little art galleries, but anytime you walk by these, if you see a window, if somebody opens a door, poke your head in, because it's amazing what you could find in here. But here down as we go, there's a Hotel Vitré, who the Madeleine Denis, who was this daughter of Maurice Denis, the amazing artist that did that fantastic ceiling that is at the Petit Palais. And he has a museum that's in Saint-Germain-en-Laye, and I cannot wait to go and check that out. This is where they lived at number 24. Look at those great doors and the lions. Don't you just love these doors? It really is. I mean, standing out, and if you stand out in the center and look back like we did at the beginning and where we'll do at the end, I mean, the facade of this whole place is just great, but it's just even more beautiful underneath here, I think. And then to the right, again, like this was, the buildings used to connect, but then they had, cut through them so they could have some roads through here. And this side that we'll head down to is a little on the quieter side. There's not as many things, but we have Cafe Hugo here because Victor Hugo, of course, lived here. He didn't live here for that long though, but long enough to keep his lasting name here. There's even a school. There's a school here in the building. Could you imagine being like, this was your school? And is it this, what number are we here? Oh, I was thinking there was a plaque there. One of these right here is the school. I think it might be down a little bit farther. But a lot of these, the Duc de Sully, who, of course, the Hotel de Sully was his and named after, a lot of his ministers and people took over these, ended up purchasing and taking over these. He was the, very close confidant of Henry IV, and they had been very close since they were very young. Henry IV was on his way to come and see him to see Sully when he was stabbed and killed by Ravaillac. Sadly. A number, because of these great doors. This was the Hotel Asfeld. And then the next one is the Hotel Ribot. And this was where the ceilings were done by Charles Lebrun, and they were amazing. And he did these in 1652, before he did Vaux-le-Vicomte and Versailles. So he did this right when he was coming back from Italy. So it's very early Charles Lebrun as far as what the decorations that he did. And it is now in the Carnavalet. So you could now go and see that, which is fantastic that they did say some of these things were destroyed. There was amazing staircases done by Louis Laveau, and paintings of ceilings by Eustache Lesueur in some of these buildings. And they were basically just all destroyed, which is just breaks your heart. I just always think of all the things lost to the revolution, just kills me that, but we are very lucky in Paris and France that we have so much still today. But I just think about those things that we did not have. So this isn't one of you see these plaques, especially at schools, a lot of times in the Marais, dedicated to the children that were lost during World War II. They were taken to the camps and died. We will never forget. Just so sad, tragic, and disgusting. Very sad. So this is the school that is here. I think this would be a pretty great school to come to. They do have, there's also that gorgeous school that's just right out on Rue Saint-Paul. That is just like, oh, what I would have given to have that as a school. And there should be, let's see, some more great. Sometimes I love looking in those art galleries because you could just find some really cool things inside there. At number 10, this is the Hotel de Châtillon. He was an engineer for Henry IV. He loved to travel all over the world. And Louis XIII used to come and visit him because he would have these models, engineering models that he would be working on. And so they loved to come up there and check those out. And next door at number 8 is this one's pretty cool. And I love, there is a plaque on this one, which is funny when you hear the story. So This event originally, it was a Hôtel de Forcy. It was built for Jean de Forcy, who again was in charge of the King's building under Louis XIV. There's a plaque on here dedicated to Théopold Gautier, and which is funny because he was a poet and an art critic and a writer. And he wrote, "I then lived with my parents at the Place Royale number 8 in the corner of the row of arcades that was the town hall. If I note this detail, it is not to indicate in the future as of my residence, I'm not one of those in posterity who will mark my houses with a bust or marble plaque." And they added the marble plaque. Which is just kind of funny. But he was this amazing writer at the time, the Romanticism. And he, right next door, we're going to come in a minute to Victor Hugo. And the two of them would actually talk out their windows. But he only lived here for a short period of time. He was born here and then he came back here later with his parents, and he ended up having two daughters with Ernesta Grissy, and one of them, Judith Gautier, was became a mistress later of Victor Hugo, became mistress with his friend. But she was also the mistress of Baudelaire, and there was a bunch of other fun things about her, so she's on the list for the podcast. But Baudelaire dedicated Les Fleurs de Mal to him. So here at number 6, and he's also going to come into play with where we're going to go next weekend, which is going to be a favorite for many people, I think. Talking to you, Ron and Debbie. But this is a number 6 here, and it's been reopened. It is the Musée Victor Hugo. This was closed during the pandemic for a while because they were adding a little cafe in the back, which I think we could kind of see through that window. But, after last week and getting yelled at, poor Kate getting yelled at the Musée de La Vida Romantique, and it looks like somebody's there at the door. But this is a great museum. It is free to go into. You do have to pay if there is a special exhibit going on. But he actually in 1832, July 12th, 1832, is when he signed the lease, moved here. He lived here from 1832 to 1848. He ended up having to flee Paris because he ticked off Napoleon III and he hated Napoleon III. So he fled France for a while. But in 1833 is when he took up with Juliette Drouet, and she was his mistress for 50 years. We did an episode about her too. She was pretty amazing. He kept her, he put her up in an apartment close to here so he could see her. But then he wouldn't let her go out during the day unless he went with her, and she basically worked as his secretary and copied everything that he wrote because there wasn't photocopies back then. So he would write these plays and these novels and stuff, and she would basically spend all of her time rewriting and copying it. But they were together for 50 years. And he was devastated when she died, but it didn't keep him for a period of time he was quite the ladies' man, that Victor Hugo. But the museum is really interesting. You go in there, you see his bedroom. He didn't die here. He died over at the location off of on what is now Avenue Victor Hugo in the 8th. But they have his bed in there. He used to like to write standing up. And so it is pretty cool in there. It has a lot of his art and photos. But the museum itself was opened in 1902, was inaugurated in June of 1903. And the first curator was a gentleman named Louis Koch, who was the nephew of Juliette Drouet. And when his wife died, she told their sons to look after her. His wife had already been cheating on him with his friend Saint-Pierre. And so he was pretty ticked off about that. And some of the characters, it is said that maybe Quasimodo is based on his friend. He's really mad at him. I guess if that's a good thing, you just turn him into a hunchback. But it is a fantastic museum. It's open Tuesday through Sunday. And it is free unless if there's a special exhibit, you have to pay, but it's only like 5 or 6 euros. And so it's usually very few people are ever there. Look at that gorgeous door. Few people are ever actually there. So it's a great thing to do. Come over here, make a whole day of the Marais. Come here, maybe go to the Carnavalet first thing in the morning. And then, when you get hungry, head over here and come over here for lunch and one of these great places, the Place Royale, and enjoy lunch. And in the afternoon, pop your head into Victor Hugo. You get a great view out of the windows to see out into the center, which is gorgeous. And there's some more tours going on out here, but also here there was at the right, the one that we just walked past at number 2 was known as Hotel du Guénon, and a gentleman named Jean Coin lived there, and he was a master mason that worked on the Grand Gallery in the Louvre, which of course made me super excited. And I was trying to find out more information. Did they already lock that off, Kate? But I was trying.
Yeah, it's closed.
Oh, they it's I guess it's still early.
Yeah, it's getting quite dark.
Yeah,
already.
that's true. I guess it is close to sunset. But I couldn't find anything about old Jean, about what he did in the Grand Gallery. I will look in my master 3-volume Louvre history set to see what I could find, because of course that piqued my interest. But as I said earlier, Colette lived here. But I think it was near the Queen's Pavilion there on the other side near Carrette is where Dominique Strauss-Kahn was living with Anne Sinclair, his wife at the time. And luckily she smartened up and divorced him. But Anne Sinclair is amazing because she was a very popular TV personality, and she had this very popular interview show that was on in Paris and in France. And when she took up with Dominique Strauss-Kahn, because he was in charge of the the International Monetary Fund, I think it is, the IMF, and he had aspirations to run for president. So she stepped down from her very popular TV gig. It was like one of the most popular TV shows in France. She stepped down, and then he went to New York, and then he, attacked that maid and went on trial. You have to, the documentary is really interesting, but he's a real cad that gets away with it. But Anne finally figured it out when he was being sued for basically being a pimp. But Anne Sinclair herself, she is the granddaughter of Rosenberg, and he was one of the major art dealers during before World War II. He had we did walk by on one of the walks to Rue de la Boîte, and that was where he had his gallery. And before the war started, he had shipped quite a few of his paintings off to America, but he didn't get everything sent off. So he still had a lot of stuff in the gallery, and he put a bunch of stuff in vaults in the banks. And any of the artists, any of the galleries that did that, basically all of them lost everything, because the Germans would go in there and get access to the banks and steal everything. But he ended up escaping off to New York. So he got out of there with his family. And then, as we know, a lot of that art, of course, some of it was not recovered. So Anne Sinclair has champion getting a lot of that art back, and she has actually, they have been able to find some of it and get it back from different places that, of course, as we know, sometimes they were sold, and most people think that they were buying, legit buying this art, only to find out that it was actually stolen. The country of France just recently made a big proclamation a couple weeks ago that they actually are giving back, it was a dozen or so, I think 14 paintings through restitution back to the original owners. There's been quite a few stories in the last couple months about a lot of art that's being given back to the original owners, which is great. But Anne Sinclair has done a huge amount of work of trying to get that back. So yeah, so he lived right around in here. Oh, you're so nice. Thank you for that sweet comment. I know, I didn't want to get it. I've done some stuff for the French embassy in the US sharing history. So was incredibly honored and excited when I got to do that. And I'm still doing a few things with them. But I do love to share anything about Paris. But next week, we are going to go to a favorite. We are going to visit the Ile de la Cité or Ile Saint-Louis. I think Ile Saint-Louis for sure. If we have time, we'll go over to, but it's mostly going to be Ile Saint-Louis. And we'll walk around there. And oh, look, Gautier over there kind of comes into play because he set up he was a president of an organization that was into the research of cannabis. And this was in the 19th century. And they were set up originally on the Ile Saint-Louis. So we'll show you that. This one, the Pavilion de Rien, this one on the other side, of course, we had the Pavilion de Roi that had a bust of Henry IV on it. And this one has very high up, which I don't think we could see, some fleur-de-lis. Which could you imagine living there? Okay, could we imagine? Can you see him? Oh, there we are. Can you imagine how expensive these are to live? Let's move in, Kate. We could live here.
Oh, please.
Look at those windows. Oh, look at how high those windows are. Just amazing. And they get all that morning light, the afternoon. Oh my gosh, I bet those places are just, gorgeous. I'll poke around on the internet and see if I could find some interiors, like, Architectural Digest and stuff. It's always fun to peek in there. I did see one that was for sale, and it was one of the very top levels. So it's the Chambre de Bon, and it was something like $2.7 million or something. It was a 2-bedroom, but it's pretty amazing.
I was looking in the estate agent window on my way here.
Yeah.
All of the, between 3 and 4 million for
I know.
bed.
When you start looking at those and then you see a place that's like 800,000, you're like, oh, that's that's not bad.
No.
It's really warped perception when you think $800,000 is like, oh, that's a deal. Yeah, Saving Mona Lisa is an amazing book. I've read that one actually twice. I love that book about Jacques Goujon and everything that he did to save everything in the Louvre. But it wasn't the first time. They also did that in World War I, which most people don't talk about. And they also did it for the Preston Siege is when they also did that too. But it is a great book. But thank you guys all so much for joining us today. And we really appreciate you being here and your support. And if you want to leave us a little tip at all, you could do it to my PayPal or my Venmo at ClaudineHemingway.com. I just put a little link in there for that as well in the chat. So we welcome any tips from you that we could keep this little project of ours going. And keep us, fed and filled up with champagne. But thank you guys all so much. And we're excited. Next week, we'll come to you from the Ile Saint-Louis and all of that great stuff. We did that once well over a year ago when we first started this, but Crystal was walking so fast. Kate, I think that was the first time you were walking with us. Crystal walked so fast that there was like half of the stuff we missed. So we're gonna do it again.
It was the most freezing day of all time.
It was so. I think, and Lauren was with you, and she went. And you guys hid in the church.
Lauren just sat in the church the whole time.
They went into the church and waited because it was so incredibly cold. So Crystal was like sprinting, and then all of a sudden I was like literally like 4 pages of like notes. I was like, wait a minute, we just literally skipped over half of this.
I'll wrap up warm and we'll stroll around.
Yeah, well, hopefully we're getting warmer a little bit each day. Warmer
Hopefully,
and lighter.
Fingers crossed.
Fingers crossed. But thank you guys all so much for joining us. We really appreciate it. And I'll post this video later on my website, as well as my YouTube, Claudine Blue Blanc Rouge on YouTube, and ClaudineHemingway.com. And I'll also put a bunch of the notes on there, and links to some of this stuff, like the past episodes we mentioned, and I'll have all of that good stuff on here. So when you go, you could even take it with you, print it up, take it with you, maybe put this on your, on your phone and listen to it, and do your own little walk. So, but if you are in Paris in this spring, I will be there, and I will be doing tours, and I'm already filling up. So if you're going to be there in April and May, so shoot me a message if you want to do a tour outside. We could even do in my favorite, the Louvre, or the Orsay, quite a few places. So thank you so much, Kate. Kate, get a pop on and say hi.
Yeah, I'll say hi, looking like a drowned rat.
You don't look,
Apologies.
you always look beautiful. She always looks beautiful. Oh, and no more
So-
masks anymore outside.
I know. Yeah.
No more masks.
Well,
Yeah, we'll see.
for now. Yeah.
For now. Always keeping agile. But thank you guys all so much. And thank you, Kate. And we will see you next week. And I will have more information on my website.
Well, thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Thanks, Kate.
Thanks, Claudine.
Bye.
See you next week. Bye.